Stranded ships and global capitalism. So you may have heard that the company Evergreen's ship, the Evergiven, got a little stuck in the Suez Canal recently. It's just been freed a couple of days ago, but essentially slowed down all cargo shipping from China, India, and those areas to Europe and the Americas, because it's much slower to have to go around the bottom of Africa. I forget which cape it is. I think it's the Cape of Good Hope. To go around the Cape of Good Hope and come all the way back up to Europe or to the Americas. The Suez Canal is an incredibly important piece of the puzzle where it comes to international trade and the flow of international capital. And also, of course, Egypt collects tolls on every ship that goes through there, so it's an incredibly important resource for Egypt as well. So how does this have to do with global capitalism, you ask? It was just some wind that blew the ship into a rock and it caused it to run aground. So the reason it's related to capitalism is twofold. One, the size of these ships continues to get larger because the demand to move consumer goods around the world continues to get larger, right? The Evergiven had some several thousand containers on it traveling through the Suez, and the boat was absolutely monstrously huge. And by the way, if you know anything about how wind works, right, if you have a large straight up and down wall that can be moved and the wind pushes up against it, it's going to move, right? No matter how heavy it is, provided that it's moving on something where there's no, this will get a little too physicsy here, but if there's no coefficient of static friction, or there's very little coefficient of static friction, like a ship on the water, then the amount of wind that can push against a large flat surface, you can really start to move that ship. And that's what happened, right? The ship was simply a giant wall that was able to move. The wind caught it, and it went aground. But the reason that has to do with capitalism is because the constant demand of constant growth and infinite economics and infinite increases has made it so that these ships need to get bigger and bigger and bigger, and they have to carry more and more stuff. And the ship then becomes more difficult to pilot because it's more subject to the forces around it. But also, and more importantly, the Suez Canal isn't getting any bigger, right? Oftentimes, its borders are fixed. You can't make it bigger. You can redredge it, you can make it deeper, but you can't make it wider. So as these ships get larger to respond to the demands of global capital and global capitalism, the ships continue, the canal doesn't get any bigger. So it's much more likely that ships get caught in the canal because of the way that demand is going. And the more ships that are in there, the more likely this is to happen. And of course, the pressure is always more ships, more cargo, bigger ships, bigger cargo, because it's more profit for the people who run these companies. So obviously, we need to keep in mind that we cannot have an infinite growth economy in a planet with finite resources, and that the solution is not, thank you Elon Musk, to go to other planets and destroy them, but the solution is to scale back our global consumerism, to reduce, reuse, and recycle where we can, and to make sure that there is no need for this constant growth, this constant making of ships bigger, making of the cargo heavier, making the containers bigger. Because if we do, we're literally throwing a cog in the works, because things will get stuck again. Capital will slow down again. And even though the rich are not affected most of the time when this happens, if global stock markets fall because of a failure of capital to move around, it's regular working people who lose their job. It's regular working people who suffer the consequences that have to go on breadlines. And this is especially true in America, when the stock market tanked in 2008, and again just a few years ago. The rich were fine because the rich were bailed out, or they had enough money, or they had insurance. or they're bailed out by insurance, or they're bailed out by governments. Regular people, though, lost their jobs so that the rich could keep their hegemony. So if we can reduce the amount of consumerism that we are participating in, that we are fed every day of our lives, every commercial telling you have to buy this new thing, especially non-consumable goods, and non-perishables. The less we use, the less need there is for this constant growth. Companies will still try and get us to buy more things, but we have the power. We are the consumer audience that's being marketed to, and we can take a stand if we work together to reduce the amount of shipping moving, to reduce the chance that there's a big issue with a ship getting stuck or with cargo being lost and things like that. And while that mostly affects the rich, they always trickle that hurt down to the poor. The second thing about global capitalism that's brought up is that this is someone brought to my attention that the Evergiven and the Evergreen, I'm going to get this wrong, but the company who made it, I think, is a Taiwanese company, and the company who owns it is a Japanese company. But the ship is registered in Panama. So that doesn't make any sense, right? Why would a ship that is traveling internationally, that's owned by a Japanese company, that's built by a Taiwanese company, be registered in Panama? And the reason is because of race to the bottom international politics, especially, and this is especially true of shipping. So if you've ever been on a cruise ship, you'll notice that all the cruise ships have fly a flag of like Bermuda or Panama or some other small Caribbean country. And the reason they do this is for the giant tax breaks. If they were to fly the flag of the United States or of a European country or Canada or Mexico or whatever, there are large scale regulations that regulate, that require these companies to pay huge amounts of corporate tax. But because a ship can be anywhere, if you register it to another country, you can force it so that you can force the system such that you don't have to pay as many taxes to there. And that's what's happening with the Evergreen, is being registered, the Evergiven being registered in Panama. The only reason they did that is to avoid taxes. This is just one more step in the giant international scheme that the rich use to hide their money. Hundreds of billions, trillions of dollars are being hidden in offshore accounts in laundered places, such as the Swiss banks, or oh my gosh, what's the name? The Cayman Islands and things like that, right? We had the Panama Papers just a couple of years ago. Remember the Panama Papers telling us that the rich had this complex scheme to hide money all over the world. Boats are part of it because they can be registered anywhere. Now, there's a solution for this, and that's actually a fairly simple solution. Okay, you want to be registered in a particular country. That's fine. Do whatever you want. So there are two solutions, right? The first solution is, okay, well, if you're going to register in country X, in order to avoid paying our taxes, then you can't do business here. Now, this isn't a great solution in my opinion, because what it says is, if every country took this approach, ships would have to be registered in multiple places. Now, that could possibly be a good thing. I don't know enough about the international maritime taxes in order to know whether that makes sense. But the idea would be that you have to register then in every place that you're going to do business, and by registering there, pay taxes there. Because if not, the country will simply deny you access to port, which obviously ships need because they have human beings on it, and the humans need to eat. But also because the ships need refueling and all the other obvious reasons that ships have to dock somewhere. The other solution is to say that, okay, you can be registered anywhere you want. You want to pay your annual taxes in Panama, you want to pay your annual taxes in the Cayman Islands, you want to pay them in Quebec, who cares? Whatever, do what you want, okay? But anytime you come to port, you have to pay a tax right then and there. You have to pay it either on the value added of the goods you're bringing in, or you have to do it on the value added of the goods you're taking out, or you have to pay a service tax depending on what types of services you're offering, right? And these could be set per cap. So for a cruise ship, you might do it per capita, right? So you pay, I'm just making up numbers here, but like $130 a head. So if you have That was a terrible number. Let's just use 100 to make my math much easier. So if you have 3,000 people on your ship, you leave the United States with 3,000 people. Okay, the moment you leave, you need to you need to cut a check to the U.S. government, or Florida or California or whatever, for 300 grand. Right, just right there. That's the tax you pay to have the privilege of taking those people out. And look, the truth is, no matter what happens, the cost will be passed down to the consumer, because that's how corporations work. Their bottom line will always be their bottom line, and the preference for a corporation is just to pass any costs that it can reasonably pass on to the consumer. But what it does is it forces some of that profit to come into governments who are helping maintain these ships, right? By having places in the dock. They're helping maintain the industry by having places that these ships can go. But unfortunately, this takes an international effort. Like I spoke about on the program a few weeks ago, if there's not an international effort for these types of endeavors, what happens is that countries realize that if they opt out, they can get all the business, much like Delaware does with corporate taxes in the United States, right? Every company and their shell company is registered in Delaware. Why? Cheap corporate taxes, right? All these ships, right? If there's an international treaty and say Panama says, well, everyone else has signed it, but we don't have to. And because we don't have to, we can get all the business, right? We can make a volume-based profit by having all these ships and things come in to us. So any international effort that is done for this has to be wholly inclusive and needs to include some form of punitives for countries that don't ascribe to it. Because if not, you're going to severely limit the efficacy of such a program. Now, there is one caveat to this that I do want to point out that I think is just kind of important. Some of this is influenced by consumer demand. So, for example, if we were to do an international levers tax and every country was to use that, is it true that countries that opt out, countries that opt out of it would have more business? Yeah, it is. But at some point, the corporation realizes that the consumer base is too active to ignore. So there's a good chance that even if you were to use a type of levers tax like this, you'd still have ships coming into harbors where it was expensive for them to do business. They would just raise the price of tickets, or they find another way to recoup that cost, because the amount of money coming into them from the consumers from that country is too valuable to give up. This is actually an argument that's made, this is a little bit off topic, but this is an argument that's made for increasing the corporate taxes in America and increasing working standards in America, and using things like a levers tax or an offshore tax, or or using tax breaks for companies that create jobs in the United States, because putting taxes even on companies that create jobs in the United States. The argument for that is the American market is just too big, too consumer focused to ignore. It may be more expensive to manufacture your goods here, to take your ship here or whatever, but there's so many people who are going to buy so much of it, they will make a profit. It will not hurt them so much that they will move their business elsewhere. And of course, the issue, and this comes back to the global capitalism thing, is that capital can move. The rich have enough money that they can leave whatever it is where it is, abandon it, and build up a new shop tomorrow somewhere else. Capital is fluid. Capital moves all over the world. The Panama Papers prove that. But labor is not fluid. It's very hard for people to move. Either you're locked in a lease or you own a home. Oftentimes you are stuck in places for a particular amount of time. It's hard to just get up and move. Now in the remote economy, it's a little easier, but still, it's hard to transcend national boundaries and things. But capital can move facilely. I don't know if that's a word, but capital can move in a facile manner to anywhere in the world. They can just pick up one place and put down in another. So we need to use national policy to root out the race to the bottom type international politics that we experience with places like Panama and the Cayman Islands, but also I forgot what I was going to say. But yes, we need to use international forces to make sure that capital doesn't move around as much, because the more the capital moves, or to punish capital when it does move, because the more the capital moves, the more it hurts labor.